Question 1. The efficiency study reveals that the current claims handling process lacks standardized procedures, leading to inconsistencies in how injured workers' benefits are managed. To address this, a written policy is being developed. Which approach to establishing this written policy is most aligned with best practices for certified work comp advisors? Option A. Engage a third-party legal expert to draft a comprehensive policy based solely on the latest regulatory updates, without direct input from internal claims staff or employer representatives. Option B. Adopt a widely available template policy from an industry association and make minor edits to reflect the organization's name and contact information. Option C. Develop the policy internally, focusing on incorporating all relevant state statutes and regulations, and then disseminate it to all relevant departments for implementation. Option D. Form a cross-functional committee including representatives from claims, human resources, legal, and employer liaisons to collaboratively draft the policy, ensuring it addresses both regulatory compliance and practical operational needs. The correct answer is C. Develop the policy internally, focusing on incorporating all relevant state statutes and regulations, and then disseminate it to all relevant departments for implementation. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for clear, actionable guidance with the potential for overregulation or misinterpretation by different stakeholders. A well-established written policy is crucial for ensuring consistent application of work comp principles, but its development must consider the diverse needs and perspectives of all involved parties. Careful judgment is required to create a policy that is both compliant and practical. The correct approach involves actively engaging all key stakeholders in the development of the written policy. This collaborative process ensures that the policy reflects the realities of claims management, the needs of injured workers, the requirements of employers, and the legal obligations under the relevant work comp framework. By seeking input and consensus, the policy is more likely to be understood, accepted, and effectively implemented, thereby promoting compliance and efficiency. This aligns with the ethical obligation to act in the best interests of all parties involved in the work comp system and to uphold the integrity of the process. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the legal department to draft the policy without broader input. This fails to incorporate the practical operational knowledge of claims adjusters and the employer perspective, potentially leading to a policy that is legally sound but difficult to implement, or that overlooks critical operational efficiencies. This could result in noncompliance due to practical barriers or a failure to achieve the intended outcomes. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed of implementation by adopting a generic template policy without customization. This risks creating a policy that does not adequately address the specific nuances of the jurisdiction's work comp laws and regulations, leading to potential legal challenges or a failure to meet compliance standards. It also neglects the opportunity to tailor the policy to the organization's specific operational context. A further incorrect approach would be to develop the policy in isolation by a single department, without any review or validation from other affected parties. This can lead to blind spots, unintended consequences, and a lack of buy-in from those who will be responsible for executing the policy. This undermines the collaborative spirit essential for effective work comp administration and can create internal friction. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that emphasizes stakeholder engagement, thorough review against regulatory requirements, and a focus on practical implementation. This involves identifying all relevant stakeholders, understanding their perspectives and needs, drafting policy components collaboratively, and conducting a comprehensive review to ensure alignment with all applicable laws and guidelines before finalization and dissemination. Question 2. Benchmark analysis indicates that a client, a manufacturing company, is seeking to significantly reduce their workers' compensation premiums. They have presented data showing a recent decrease in reported injuries. As a certified work comp advisor, which of the following approaches best aligns with promoting workplace safety and fulfilling regulatory obligations? Option A. Focus solely on negotiating with the insurance carrier for a lower premium based on the reduced claim history, without delving into the underlying causes of injuries or recommending proactive safety measures. Option B. Suggest the client reclassify certain job roles to low-risk categories to artificially reduce their exposure and premium, regardless of the actual duties performed. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive site assessment to identify specific hazards and recommend targeted safety training and equipment upgrades to mitigate identified risks, even if it involves initial investment. Option D. Advise the client to reduce their investment in existing safety programs and training, citing the recent decline in reported injuries as evidence that current measures are sufficient and can be scaled back to save costs. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive site assessment to identify specific hazards and recommend targeted safety training and equipment upgrades to mitigate identified risks, even if it involves initial investment. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an advisor to balance the immediate financial pressures of a client with the long-term, legally mandated responsibility of promoting workplace safety. The advisor must navigate the client's desire for cost reduction against the employer's fundamental duty to provide a safe working environment, which is directly tied to workers' compensation principles. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed safety initiatives are not merely superficial, but are genuinely effective and compliant with relevant regulations. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and recommending specific, actionable safety improvements that address identified risks. This aligns with the core purpose of workers' compensation, which is to mitigate the impact of workplace injuries and illnesses. By focusing on prevention, the advisor not only helps the client reduce potential future claims and associated costs, but also fulfills their ethical and regulatory obligation to promote a safer workplace. This proactive stance is a best practice because it demonstrates a commitment to the client's overall well-being, which includes their financial health and their legal and moral responsibilities. Regulatory frameworks for workers' compensation emphasize the importance of hazard identification and control as a means of reducing claim frequency and severity. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on reducing premiums without addressing underlying safety issues is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the spirit and intent of workers' compensation laws, which are designed to protect employees and encourage safe practices. Such an approach could lead to a false sense of security for the client, while actual risks remain unaddressed, potentially resulting in future claims and increased costs. It also neglects the advisor's duty to provide comprehensive guidance that goes beyond mere cost-cutting. Another incorrect approach that involves recommending the elimination of safety programs due to perceived low claim rates is also professionally unsound. Claim frequency is only one metric. The severity of potential claims and the employer's legal obligations remain constant. This approach ignores the proactive and preventative nature of effective safety management and could be seen as a dereliction of the advisor's duty to advocate for robust safety measures. It prioritizes short-term cost savings over long-term risk mitigation and employee well-being, which is contrary to the principles of responsible risk management and workers' compensation advisement. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough risk assessment, followed by the development of a tailored safety improvement plan. This plan should be communicated clearly to the client, emphasizing both the preventative benefits and the regulatory compliance aspects. The advisor should act as a partner in implementing these improvements, offering ongoing support and monitoring. This approach ensures that advice is not only financially sound, but also ethically responsible and legally compliant, fostering a truly safer and more sustainable work environment. Question 3. Strategic planning requires a certified WorkComp advisor to anticipate and address the practical implications of significant legislative reforms. Following the passage of a landmark workers' compensation reform bill in a specific U.S. state, which approach best ensures client compliance and mitigates risk? Option A. Focus primarily on the potential impact of the reform on insurance premium structures and insurer profitability, advising employers on how to leverage the changes for financial gain. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the specific legislative text and implementing regulations, analyze its direct impact on employer obligations and insurer responsibilities, and develop tailored guidance and training for employers to ensure understanding and implementation of new requirements. Option C. Assume that existing claims management and compliance procedures are sufficient and continue with current practices until specific enforcement actions are taken by regulatory bodies. Option D. Rely on general industry best practices for workers' compensation and adapt them to the new reform without a detailed examination of the specific statutory language and implementing rules of the jurisdiction. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of the specific legislative text and implementing regulations. Analyze its direct impact on employer obligations and insurer responsibilities, and develop tailored guidance and training for employers to ensure understanding and implementation of new requirements. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a certified WorkComp advisor, CWCA, to navigate the complex and evolving landscape of workers' compensation legislation, specifically focusing on the implementation of a significant reform. The advisor must not only understand the historical context of legislative milestones, but also anticipate and address the practical challenges of integrating new mandates into existing claims management and employer compliance strategies. The core difficulty lies in translating legislative intent into actionable operational changes, while ensuring adherence to the specific regulatory framework governing workers' compensation in the relevant U.S. jurisdiction. The correct approach involves a proactive and comprehensive review of the specific legislative reform, identifying its direct impacts on employer obligations, insurer responsibilities, and employee rights. This includes a detailed analysis of any new reporting requirements, benefit adjustments, or procedural changes mandated by the reform. The CWCA must then develop tailored guidance and training materials for employers, ensuring they understand their new responsibilities and can implement necessary adjustments to their internal processes and insurance coverage. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the practical implications of legislative changes, ensuring compliance and mitigating potential risks for employers. It aligns with the ethical obligation of a CWCA to provide accurate, up-to-date advice and to assist clients in navigating the complexities of workers' compensation law, thereby upholding the integrity of the system and protecting the interests of all stakeholders. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the new legislation, assuming that existing practices are sufficient. This failure to acknowledge and adapt to legislative changes constitutes a significant regulatory and ethical lapse. It exposes employers to potential penalties, fines, and legal liabilities for noncompliance. Furthermore, it violates the professional duty of a CWCA to stay informed about and advise on all relevant legal requirements. Another incorrect approach would be to implement changes based on a general understanding of workers' compensation reforms, without consulting the specific statutory language and implementing regulations of the relevant U.S. jurisdiction. This could lead to misinterpretations of the law, resulting in non-compliant practices and unintended consequences. The failure to adhere to the precise mandates of the specific jurisdiction's laws is a direct regulatory failure. A third incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the financial implications of the reform for insurers, neglecting the impact on employer obligations and employee protections. While financial considerations are important, a CWCA role is to provide holistic advice that encompasses legal compliance, operational efficiency, and the well-being of injured workers, all within the framework of the law. This narrow focus represents an ethical failure to provide comprehensive and balanced guidance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. First, identifying the specific legislative reform and its effective date. Second, conducting a thorough review of the statutory text and any accompanying regulations. Third, assessing the practical impact of the reform on employers, insurers, and employees. Fourth, developing clear, actionable guidance and training. And fifth, continuously monitoring for any subsequent amendments or judicial interpretations. This structured process ensures that advice is legally sound, ethically responsible, and practically effective. Question 4. What factors determine the primary objectives of a workers' compensation program from the perspective of ensuring both worker well-being and employer responsibility within the U.S. regulatory framework? Option A. The potential for minimizing employer premium costs through aggressive claims denial and strict limitations on medical treatment. Option B. The efficiency of claims processing and administrative overhead reduction, even if it impacts the speed of benefit delivery. Option C. The extent to which the program provides prompt medical treatment and wage replacement to injured workers, alongside promoting workplace safety and ensuring the financial solvency of the system. Option D. The maximization of investment returns for insurance carriers and the reduction of their overall payout liabilities. The correct answer is C. The extent to which the program provides prompt medical treatment and wage replacement to injured workers, alongside promoting workplace safety and ensuring the financial solvency of the system. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the diverse and often competing interests of multiple stakeholders within the workers' compensation system. A certified WorkComp advisor, CWCA, must understand that the system's objectives are not monolithic, but rather a complex interplay of social welfare, economic efficiency, and legal compliance. Careful judgment is required to identify which stakeholder perspectives most accurately reflect the overarching goals of workers' compensation as defined by its regulatory framework. The correct approach is to prioritize the perspectives that align with the fundamental goals of workers' compensation, as established by U.S. federal and state statutes and regulations. These goals typically include providing prompt and adequate medical care and wage replacement to injured workers, promoting workplace safety to prevent injuries, and ensuring the financial stability of the system through fair premium assessments and efficient claims management. Focusing on the injured worker's immediate needs and the employer's responsibility for a safe workplace directly addresses these core objectives. An approach that solely focuses on minimizing employer premium costs without considering the adequacy of benefits or the effectiveness of safety programs fails to uphold the system's primary purpose of worker protection. This neglects the regulatory mandate to provide for injured employees and can lead to inadequate care or financial hardship for those who have suffered work-related injuries. An approach that exclusively emphasizes the administrative efficiency of the claims process, to the detriment of timely and appropriate medical treatment or fair compensation for lost wages, is also flawed. While efficiency is desirable, it should not come at the expense of the injured worker's well-being, which is a central tenet of workers' compensation law. An approach that prioritizes the financial return on investment for insurance carriers above all else overlooks the fact that workers' compensation is a regulated social insurance program, not solely a profit-driven enterprise. While profitability is a factor for carriers, the system's foundational goals are worker protection and employer liability for workplace injuries. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the specific state's workers' compensation statutes and regulations. This involves identifying the primary objectives outlined in the legislation, such as ensuring medical benefits, wage replacement, and rehabilitation for injured workers, as well as promoting workplace safety. Next, they should analyze how different stakeholder interests, injured workers, employers, insurers, medical providers, government agencies, align with or diverge from these statutory goals. The advisor's role is to advocate for approaches that best fulfill the legislative intent, ensuring that all parties operate within the established legal and ethical boundaries of the workers' compensation system. Question 5. Examination of the data shows a worker reporting a back injury that began to cause significant pain immediately after lifting a heavy object at work. The worker states the pain was mild before the incident but became severe afterward. The employer is concerned about the claim's validity due to a pre-existing degenerative condition noted in the worker's medical history from several years prior. What is the most appropriate approach to establishing a causal relationship? Option A. Accept the claim solely based on the worker's statement that the pain began immediately after the lifting incident, without further investigation into the medical causation. Option B. Advise the employer that since the worker had a pre-existing condition, the claim is likely not work-related and suggest they contest it. Option C. Obtain a detailed medical report from the treating physician that specifically addresses whether the work activity was a substantial contributing factor to the onset or aggravation of the back injury, considering the pre-existing condition. Option D. Deny the claim outright because the worker had a pre-existing degenerative condition, assuming it is the sole cause of the current pain. The correct answer is C. Obtain a detailed medical report from the treating physician that specifically addresses whether the work activity was a substantial contributing factor to the onset or aggravation of the back injury, considering the pre-existing condition. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because establishing a causal relationship between an injury and employment in workers' compensation requires a meticulous and objective assessment. Moving beyond mere temporal proximity, the advisor must navigate potential biases, incomplete information, and the inherent complexities of medical causation. A failure to adhere to established legal and regulatory standards for proving causation can lead to incorrect claim determinations, impacting both the injured worker's benefits and the employer's experience rating. The correct approach involves a thorough review of all available evidence, including medical records, witness statements, and the specific nature of the work performed, to determine if the employment was a substantial contributing factor to the injury. This aligns with the fundamental principles of workers' compensation law, which generally require proof that the injury arose out of and in the course of employment. The advisor must apply a legal standard of proof, often a preponderance of the evidence, to link the work activities or conditions directly to the onset or aggravation of the condition. An approach that relies solely on the employee's subjective report without independent corroboration or medical evaluation is ethically and regulatorily deficient. This fails to meet the burden of proof required by workers' compensation statutes and can lead to the approval of claims not genuinely work-related, potentially exposing the employer to unwarranted costs and undermining the integrity of the system. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss a claim solely because the symptoms manifested after the work shift, without investigating whether the work activities initiated or aggravated the condition during the shift. This overlooks the possibility of latent injuries or conditions that develop over time due to occupational exposure or exertion. It fails to consider the full spectrum of how employment can cause or contribute to an injury. Furthermore, an approach that prioritizes the employer's desire to limit costs over a fair and objective assessment of causation is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. Workers' compensation is a no-fault system designed to protect employees, and the advisor's duty is to apply the law impartially, not to act as an advocate for one party over the other in determining factual causation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Gathering all relevant factual information. 2. Consulting applicable statutes and case law regarding causation. 3. Obtaining objective medical opinions when necessary. And 4. Applying the legal standard of proof to the totality of the evidence to reach a well-reasoned conclusion on whether employment was a substantial contributing factor to the injury. Question 6. When evaluating a client's workers' compensation insurance policy, you discover that a mandatory premium payment was missed by 2 weeks, and no notification has been received from the insurer or the state's workers' compensation board regarding this delinquency. The client expresses concern about incurring additional costs and suggests waiting to see if the issue resolves itself before taking any action. What is the most professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Suggest to the client that they contact the insurer directly to inquire about the missed payment without disclosing the full extent of the delay or the potential for penalties, to gauge the insurer's reaction. Option B. Advise the client to wait for official notification from the insurer or the state board before taking any action, as they may offer a grace period or waive penalties if the issue is addressed promptly upon receipt of communication. Option C. Recommend that the client explore options for disputing the missed payment, even without a clear basis for dispute, to potentially avoid immediate penalty assessment while further investigation occurs. Option D. Immediately inform the client of the missed payment. Explain the potential penalties and consequences of non-compliance according to the relevant state's workers' compensation laws, and advise them to remit the overdue payment, along with any applicable late fees or interest, as soon as possible. The correct answer is D. Immediately inform the client of the missed payment. Explain the potential penalties and consequences of non-compliance according to the relevant state's workers' compensation laws, and advise them to remit the overdue payment along with any applicable late fees or interest as soon as possible. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it forces a certified WorkComp advisor, CWCA, to balance the immediate financial interests of their client with their legal and ethical obligations under the relevant workers' compensation framework. The CWCA must navigate the potential for significant penalties and reputational damage associated with noncompliance, while also advising their client on the most advantageous course of action. The core of the challenge lies in the tension between a client's desire to avoid immediate costs and the regulatory imperative to adhere to strict timelines for reporting and premium payments, which are designed to ensure the solvency of the workers' compensation system and protect injured workers. The correct approach involves proactively identifying the missed deadline, immediately informing the client of the regulatory breach, explaining the potential penalties and consequences, and recommending prompt action to rectify the situation. This approach is ethically sound and legally compliant because it prioritizes transparency and adherence to the law. Specifically, it aligns with the fundamental duty of a CWCA to act in the best interests of their client while upholding the integrity of the workers' compensation system. Promptly addressing the noncompliance demonstrates professional responsibility and mitigates further risk. The regulatory framework for workers' compensation typically imposes strict timelines for premium payments and reporting, and failure to meet these deadlines can result in escalating penalties, interest charges, and even the suspension or revocation of coverage, all of which must be clearly communicated to the client. An incorrect approach would be to delay informing the client about the missed deadline, hoping that the issue might go unnoticed or resolve itself. This is a failure of professional duty and a direct violation of ethical obligations to be transparent and act with diligence. It also significantly increases the likelihood of more severe penalties as the period of noncompliance lengthens. Another incorrect approach would be to advise the client to ignore the missed deadline and hope for leniency, without understanding the specific penalty structure and appeal processes. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the regulatory framework and exposes the client to unnecessary risk. Finally, advising the client to falsify information or attempt to circumvent reporting requirements would be a severe ethical and legal breach, leading to disciplinary action and potential legal consequences for both the advisor and the client. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the applicable workers' compensation laws and regulations, including specific timelines, reporting requirements, and penalty structures. When a potential compliance issue arises, the CWCA must immediately assess the situation, gather all relevant facts, and then communicate clearly and promptly with the client. This communication should outline the nature of the noncompliance, the potential consequences, including financial penalties and operational impacts, and a recommended course of action that prioritizes regulatory adherence and risk mitigation. Seeking clarification from regulatory bodies or legal counsel may be necessary in complex situations. Question 7. Compliance review shows that a client, a small business owner, is requesting their certified work comp advisor, CWCA, to classify a long-term, full-time worker as an independent contractor to reduce workers' compensation insurance premiums, despite the worker performing duties identical to other employees and having no control over their work schedule or methods. The CWCA is aware that this classification likely does not meet the statutory tests for independent contractor status in their jurisdiction. What is the most appropriate course of action for the CWCA? Option A. Inform the client that the classification is their decision and offer to process the paperwork for independent contractor status without further comment on its legality. Option B. Advise the client that the worker's classification as an independent contractor is likely not compliant with statutory requirements and refuse to process the classification change, explaining the legal ramifications of misclassification. Option C. Proceed with classifying the worker as an independent contractor as requested by the client, stating that the client is making the final business decision. Option D. Recommend that the client consult with an attorney to determine the worker's classification, but proceed with the independent contractor classification in the interim. The correct answer is B. Advise the client that the worker's classification as an independent contractor is likely not compliant with statutory requirements and refuse to process the classification change, explaining the legal ramifications of misclassification. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a certified work comp advisor, CWCA, to navigate a situation where a client's stated intent conflicts with the explicit requirements of the governing workers' compensation statutes. The CWCA must prioritize legal compliance and the integrity of the workers' compensation system over a client's potentially misinformed or self-serving request. Failure to do so could result in significant legal and ethical repercussions for both the advisor and the client, and undermine the fundamental principles of workers' compensation. The correct approach involves advising the client on the legal requirements and refusing to facilitate an action that violates those requirements. This upholds the CWCA professional duty to act ethically and in accordance with the law. Specifically, the The CWCA must explain that misclassifying an employee as an independent contractor to avoid premium obligations is a violation of workers' compensation statutes. The advisor's role is to ensure compliance, not to assist in circumventing legal obligations. This aligns with the ethical standards and regulatory framework governing CWCA, which mandate adherence to all applicable laws and regulations. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the client's request to classify the worker as an independent contractor without proper legal justification. This constitutes aiding and abetting a violation of workers' compensation laws, which can lead to penalties, fines, and potential revocation of the CWCA license. Another incorrect approach would be to simply state that the client is making the decision, absolving the advisor of responsibility. While the client ultimately makes business decisions, the CWCA has a professional obligation to provide accurate legal and regulatory guidance and to refuse to participate in illegal activities. Failing to proactively advise against the illegal classification and instead passively allowing it to occur is a dereliction of duty. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal and ethical considerations. First, identify the core issue, a client request that appears to violate workers' compensation law. Second, consult the relevant statutes and regulations to confirm the legal requirements regarding employee versus independent contractor classification. Third, clearly and unequivocally communicate the legal requirements and the risks of non-compliance to the client. Fourth, refuse to implement any action that would violate the law, even if it means potentially losing the client. Finally, document all communications and advice provided to the client. Question 8. The performance metrics show a significant increase in the average claim duration for your assigned accounts, prompting management to emphasize the need for faster claim resolution and return-to-work initiatives. You are managing a claim for a worker who sustained a back injury and is currently undergoing physical therapy. Their physician has indicated that the worker is making steady progress, but is not yet cleared for full duty. The employer is eager to have the worker back in some capacity to reduce indemnity payments. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Advise the employer to explore options for early retirement or a settlement for the claim, as the worker's recovery appears to be slower than anticipated, to minimize ongoing indemnity payments. Option B. Directly contact the treating physician and strongly suggest that the worker be cleared for a return to their regular duties, emphasizing the employer's need to reduce claim duration and associated costs. Option C. Advocate for a modified duty assignment that aligns with the worker's current physical capabilities, as documented by their physician, and establish a clear plan for gradual progression back to full duty, ensuring ongoing communication with all parties. Option D. Encourage the employer to offer the worker a light-duty position that is less physically demanding, even if it exceeds the physician's current restrictions, to expedite their return to work and reduce claim costs. The correct answer is C. Advocate for a modified duty assignment that aligns with the worker's current physical capabilities, as documented by their physician, and establish a clear plan for gradual progression back to full duty, ensuring ongoing communication with all parties. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it pits the advisor's duty to their client, the employer, against the ethical obligation to ensure fair and appropriate benefits for the injured worker, all within the complex regulatory landscape of workers' compensation. The advisor must navigate potential conflicts of interest and maintain objectivity while advocating for their client's interests. The pressure to reduce claim costs, as indicated by performance metrics, can create an environment where cost-saving measures might inadvertently compromise the worker's well-being or violate established protocols. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective assessment of the worker's medical status and functional capacity, adhering strictly to the established return-to-work guidelines and medical treatment protocols mandated by the relevant workers' compensation statutes. This approach prioritizes the worker's recovery and safe reintegration into the workforce, ensuring that all decisions are evidence-based and compliant with legal requirements. It involves open communication with all parties, including the treating physician, the employer, and the worker, to facilitate a collaborative and informed disability management process. This aligns with the ethical duty of care and the regulatory framework's objective of providing timely and appropriate benefits while managing claim costs responsibly. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on expediting the worker's return to work without adequate medical clearance or consideration of their functional limitations would be a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This could lead to premature return, re-injury, and increased claim costs in the long run, violating the spirit and letter of workers' compensation laws designed to protect injured workers. Another incorrect approach, which involves pressuring the treating physician to prematurely release the worker or to restrict necessary medical treatment solely for cost containment, is a direct violation of professional ethics and statutory regulations. This undermines the physician's independent medical judgment and disregards the worker's right to appropriate care. Finally, an approach that neglects to involve the worker in the disability management process or fails to provide them with clear and accurate information about their rights and responsibilities would be ethically unsound and potentially violate disclosure requirements under workers' compensation law. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the applicable workers' compensation statutes and regulations. This framework requires prioritizing the worker's health and safety, ensuring all decisions are supported by objective medical evidence, and maintaining transparent communication with all stakeholders. When faced with conflicting pressures, such as performance metrics versus ethical obligation, professionals must rely on their understanding of the regulatory framework and their professional code of conduct to guide their actions, always erring on the side of compliance and ethical treatment of the injured worker. Question 9. Regulatory review indicates that an employer is requesting an independent medical examination, IME, for a claimant whose treating physician has provided a clear diagnosis and recommended a specific course of treatment. The employer expresses concerns about the duration of the claimant's recovery and suggests the IME might help expedite the return-to-work process. As a certified WorkComp advisor, what is the most appropriate risk assessment approach to this situation? Option A. Conduct a thorough review to determine if the requested IME is medically necessary to clarify diagnosis, treatment, or causation, and verify the chosen physician's qualifications and independence, while ensuring compliance with all statutory notification and procedural requirements. Option B. Schedule the IME immediately with a physician known for favoring early return to work, ensuring all necessary paperwork is sent to the physician. Option C. Advise the employer to proceed with the IME without further review, as their request for an IME to assess return to work is a standard procedure. Option D. Inform the employer that IMEs are only permissible when there is a dispute regarding the diagnosis or treatment plan and decline the request. Correct answer is B. Schedule the IME immediately with a physician known for favoring early return to work, ensuring all necessary paperwork is sent to the physician. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of the role and limitations of independent medical examinations, IME, within the workers' compensation system, specifically as governed by the regulatory framework for the Certified WorkComp Advisor, CWCA, exam. The core challenge lies in balancing the employer's right to obtain an objective medical opinion with the employee's right to fair treatment and accurate assessment of their work-related injury. A CWCA must navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure that the IME process serves its intended purpose of providing unbiased medical information for claim adjudication, rather than being used to unfairly deny or minimize benefits. The correct approach involves a thorough risk assessment focused on the IME's purpose and process. This means evaluating whether the requested IME is genuinely for the purpose of obtaining objective medical information to clarify diagnosis, treatment, or causation, and whether the chosen physician is qualified and independent. It also requires ensuring that the process adheres strictly to all applicable state workers' compensation statutes and administrative rules regarding IME notification, content of the referral, and the physician's reporting obligations. This approach upholds the ethical duty of a CWCA to act in the best interests of the claims process by promoting fairness and accuracy, and by complying with all legal requirements. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with scheduling an IME solely based on the employer's request, without critically assessing its necessity or the potential for bias. This could involve overlooking red flags such as a history of contentious IME physicians, or a referral that appears designed to challenge a well-documented claim rather than seek clarification. Another incorrect approach is to fail to ensure the IME physician is properly credentialed and has no undisclosed conflicts of interest that could compromise the objectivity of the examination. Furthermore, neglecting to confirm that the referral packet provided to the IME physician contains all relevant medical records and a clear, unbiased statement of the questions to be answered is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. These failures can lead to an IME report that is not medically sound, is procedurally flawed, and ultimately undermines the integrity of the worker's compensation claim. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a systematic risk assessment framework. This involves 1. Identifying the objective of the IME and its alignment with claim adjudication needs. 2. Verifying the qualifications and independence of the chosen medical professional. 3. Ensuring strict adherence to all procedural and notification requirements mandated by state law. And 4. Critically reviewing the referral questions for any indication of bias or intent to predetermine an outcome. This structured approach ensures that IMEs are utilized appropriately and ethically, contributing to a fair and efficient resolution of workers' compensation claims. Question 10. Cost-benefit analysis shows that engaging independent medical experts can significantly improve the accuracy of claim determinations, but it also introduces potential for bias and increased administrative costs. Considering the regulatory framework for certified WorkComp advisors, CWCA, in the United States, which of the following best describes the appropriate role and utilization of medical experts in the workers' compensation process? Option A. Medical experts are engaged to offer objective, evidence-based opinions on causality, extent of injury, and medical necessity of treatment, which are then considered alongside all other relevant evidence and jurisdictional statutes to inform claim decisions. Option B. Medical experts are employed to provide a broad overview of potential medical conditions, allowing for a speculative approach to claim assignment without requiring specific evidence linking the condition to the work injury. Option C. Medical experts are primarily used to support the position of the party who engaged them, with their reports being selectively presented to expedite claim resolution in their favor. Option D. Medical experts are primarily utilized to provide definitive diagnoses and treatment plans, with their opinions serving as the sole basis for claim adjudication, regardless of other evidence. The correct answer is D. Medical experts are primarily utilized to provide definitive diagnoses and treatment plans, with their opinions serving as the sole basis for claim adjudication, regardless of other evidence. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of the role of medical experts within the workers' compensation system, balancing the need for accurate medical assessments with the potential for bias and the financial implications for all parties involved. The Certified WorkComp Advisor, CWCA, must navigate the ethical and regulatory landscape to ensure that medical expert opinions are utilized appropriately and fairly. The correct approach involves recognizing that medical experts serve to provide objective, evidence-based opinions on causality, extent of injury, and treatment necessity, directly informing claim adjudication and management. Their role is to interpret medical evidence within the context of the workers' compensation statutes and rules of the relevant jurisdiction. This approach aligns with the fundamental principles of workers' compensation, which aim to provide timely and appropriate benefits to injured workers based on established medical facts and legal requirements. Regulatory frameworks typically mandate that medical opinions used for claim decisions must be from qualified, unbiased sources and directly relevant to the injury and its impact on the worker's ability to perform their job. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the medical expert's opinion without critical evaluation, especially if there are indications of potential bias, or if the opinion deviates significantly from established medical literature or the worker's reported symptoms and functional limitations. This failure to critically assess the expert's report could lead to incorrect claim decisions, potentially resulting in the denial of legitimate benefits or the overpayment of benefits for non-work-related conditions. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss a well-reasoned, evidence-based medical expert opinion simply because it is unfavorable to a particular party's desired outcome, such as an employer seeking to minimize claim costs or a worker seeking maximum benefits. This would undermine the integrity of the system and the purpose of employing medical experts, Professional decision-making in such situations requires a systematic process. First, thoroughly review the medical expert's report for clarity, completeness, and consistency with the presented evidence and the worker's medical history. Second, cross-reference the expert's findings with applicable workers' compensation statutes, regulation, and established medical guidelines for the specific jurisdiction. Third, identify any potential conflicts of interest or biases that might influence the expert's opinion. Finally, if discrepancies or ambiguities arise, seek clarification from the medical expert or consider obtaining a second opinion from another qualified, independent medical professional, always adhering to the procedural rules of the jurisdiction. Question 11. The monitoring system demonstrates an employee sustained an injury while taking a brief personal break in the employer's break room, which is located on the employer's premises. The employee was reaching for a snack when they slipped and fell, injuring their back. The employer's policy allows for short personal breaks during the workday. Which of the following best reflects the analysis required to determine if this injury arises out of employment under typical workers' compensation principles? Option A. Investigate whether the break was a reasonable and foreseeable activity during the workday, and if the risk of slipping in the break room was incidental to the employment environment. Option B. Automatically deny the claim because the employee was engaged in a personal activity at the time of the injury. Option C. Consult legal precedents from a neighboring state's workers' compensation board to determine compensability. Option D. Approve the claim solely because the injury occurred on the employer's premises during work hours. The correct answer is A. Investigate whether the break was a reasonable and foreseeable activity during the workday, and if the risk of slipping in the break room was incidental to the employment environment. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because determining whether an injury arises out of employment requires a nuanced application of legal principles to specific factual circumstances. It's not always a clear-cut determination, and misclassification can lead to significant financial and legal repercussions for both the employer and the injured worker. Careful judgment is required to balance the employer's responsibility to provide a safe workplace and compensate for work-related injuries against the need to ensure that compensation is only provided for injuries genuinely connected to the employment. Correct approach involves a thorough factual investigation and application of the arising out of employment test as defined by the relevant workers' compensation statutes and case law within the specified jurisdiction. This typically involves examining the causal connection between the employment duties and the injury. The injury must be a consequence of the risks inherent in or incidental to the employment. This means considering factors such as the nature of the work, the location where the injury occurred, and whether the employee was acting within the scope of their employment at the time of the incident. This approach is correct because it adheres strictly to the legal definition and evidentiary standards for establishing a compensable injury under workers' compensation law, ensuring fairness and compliance. An incorrect approach would be to automatically deny a claim simply because the employee was engaged in a personal activity at the time of the injury, without further investigation into whether that personal activity was a necessary or reasonable part of their employment, or occurred due to conditions of employment. This fails to consider exceptions or nuances in the law, such as situations where a personal comfort doctrine might apply, or where the personal activity was a foreseeable consequence of the work environment. Another incorrect approach would be to approve a claim solely based on the employee's assertion that the injury occurred at work, without verifying the causal link to employment duties or risks. This bypasses the legal requirement to demonstrate that the injury arose out of employment, potentially leading to the payment of benefits for non-work-related incidents. A third incorrect approach would be to rely on outdated or irrelevant legal precedents from other jurisdictions, failing to apply the specific statutes and case law governing the current jurisdiction. This is a fundamental failure to comply with the regulatory framework. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the applicable workers' compensation statutes and relevant case law for the specific jurisdiction. Upon receiving a claim, they should conduct a detailed factual investigation, gathering all pertinent information about the incident, the employee's duties, and the circumstances surrounding the injury. This information should then be analyzed against the legal tests for arising out of employment, considering all relevant factors and potential exceptions. Documentation of the investigation and the rationale for the decision is crucial for defensibility and compliance. Question 12. Process analysis reveals a client, a construction company, has its headquarters in state but performs significant projects in state B and has several employees who reside and primarily work in state C. The client is seeking advice on securing appropriate workers' compensation coverage. Which of the following approaches best aligns with state-specific guidelines for determining workers' compensation jurisdiction and ensuring compliance? Option A. Advise the client to obtain coverage only in State A, as this is where the company is incorporated and legally registered. Option B. Conduct a detailed review of the client's operations, employee work locations, and project sites to identify the state S with primary jurisdictional authority for workers' compensation coverage, considering the laws of State A, State B, and State C. Option C. Assume that workers' compensation laws are largely uniform across all states, and select coverage based on the most cost-effective option available. Option D. Determine jurisdiction based solely on the state where the company's headquarters is located, as this is the primary place of business. The correct answer is D. Determine jurisdiction based solely on the state where the company's headquarters is located, as this is the primary place of business. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because a certified WorkComp advisor, CWCA, must navigate the intricate and often varying state-specific guidelines for workers' compensation. The core of the challenge lies in accurately identifying and applying the correct jurisdictional rules to a client's unique situation, as failure to do so can lead to significant financial penalties, legal liabilities, and a breach of professional duty. The advisor must demonstrate a deep understanding of the nuances of each state's statutes, administrative codes, and case law relevant to workers' compensation claims. The correct approach involves a meticulous review of the client's business operations, employee locations, and the nature of the work performed to determine the primary state of jurisdiction. This is followed by a thorough examination of that state's specific statutory requirements for coverage, reporting, and claim handling. Regulatory justification stems from the CWCA ethical obligation to provide advice that is compliant with all applicable laws and regulations. This proactive and detailed jurisdictional analysis ensures that the client secures appropriate coverage and adheres to all legal mandates, thereby mitigating risk and fulfilling the advisor's fiduciary responsibility. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the state where the business is headquartered, without considering where employees primarily work or where work is performed, fails to acknowledge that workers' compensation jurisdiction is often determined by the location of the employee's work, not just the employer's principal place of business. This can lead to noncompliance if employees are working in a state with different statutory requirements. Another incorrect approach, which assumes all states have identical workers' compensation laws, ignores the fundamental reality of state-specific regulation and the significant variations in benefits, coverage mandates, and administrative procedures. This oversight can result in inadequate coverage or improper claim handling, exposing the client to substantial risk. A third incorrect approach, which prioritizes cost savings over jurisdictional accuracy by selecting a state with lower premiums without verifying that state's jurisdiction, is a direct violation of the duty of care. This approach prioritizes financial expediency over legal compliance and client protection, which is ethically unsound and professionally negligent. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the client's operational footprint. This involves actively questioning the client about all work locations, employee assignments, and the nature of services rendered. The next step is to consult authoritative resources for each potentially relevant state's workers' compensation laws and regulations. This includes reviewing state statutes, administrative codes, and relevant case law. When in doubt, seeking clarification from state regulatory bodies or legal counsel specializing in workers' compensation is a prudent step. The ultimate goal is to provide advice that is not only cost-effective but, more importantly, legally compliant and protective of the client's interests. Question 13. Research into the assessment of vocational skills for a workers' compensation claim has revealed several potential methodologies. A certified WorkComp advisor, CWCA, is tasked with evaluating an injured worker's ability to return to gainful employment, Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework for vocational assessments in this jurisdiction? Option A. Prioritizing the employer's stated desire to minimize claim costs when determining the worker's vocational potential. Option B. Relying solely on the injured worker's job title as listed in their employment records to determine their vocational capacity. Option C. Focusing exclusively on the injured worker's pre-injury wage to establish their earning capacity, irrespective of their ability to perform any work. Option D. Conducting a detailed analysis of the injured worker's pre-injury job duties, current medical restrictions, and transferable skills, considering the availability of suitable alternative employment within their geographic region and skill set. The correct answer is D. Conducting a detailed analysis of the injured worker's pre-injury job duties, current medical restrictions, and transferable skills, considering the availability of suitable alternative employment within their geographic region and skill set. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because accurately assessing vocational skills for a worker's compensation claim requires a nuanced understanding of the injured worker's pre-injury capabilities, the impact of the injury on those capabilities, and the availability of suitable alternative employment within the worker's geographic area and skill set. It demands more than a superficial review of job titles. It requires a deep dive into the actual tasks performed and the physical and cognitive demands of those tasks. The Certified WorkComp Advisor, CWCA, must navigate the specific regulatory framework governing vocational assessments in their jurisdiction to ensure fairness and compliance. The correct approach involves a comprehensive evaluation that considers the injured worker's specific job duties, the limitations imposed by their work-related injury, and their transferable skills. This approach aligns with the regulatory intent of workers' compensation, which aims to restore injured workers to suitable gainful employment whenever possible. It necessitates gathering detailed information about the worker's past performance, medical restriction, and any retraining or rehabilitation efforts. This thoroughness ensures that the assessment is objective, evidence-based, and respects the worker's rights and potential. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the worker's job title without investigating the specific duties and demands of that role fails to meet regulatory requirements for a thorough vocational assessment. This superficial method can lead to inaccurate conclusions about the worker's employability and may overlook their actual capabilities or the limitations imposed by their injury. Another incorrect approach that focuses exclusively on the worker's pre-injury earnings without considering their ability to perform any work, even at a lower wage, disregards the fundamental principle of assessing earning capacity based on actual work performance and limitations. Finally, an approach that prioritizes the employer's desire to limit benefits over an objective assessment of the worker's vocational capacity represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure, as it compromises the integrity of the process and potentially harms the injured worker. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the governing workers' compensation statutes and regulations. This involves identifying the specific criteria for vocational assessments, including the types of evidence to be considered and the standards for determining suitable gainful employment. The process should then involve gathering all relevant information, including medical reports, job descriptions, and worker interviews, to form a holistic picture. The assessment should be conducted impartially, focusing on objective data and the worker's functional abilities in relation to their injury. Regular consultation with legal counsel or vocational rehabilitation specialists, when necessary, can further ensure compliance and best practices. Question 14. To address the challenge of accurately determining an injured worker's permanent impairment rating, which of the following methodologies best aligns with the regulatory framework for certified WorkComp advisors in this jurisdiction? Option A. A rating determined by the treating physician's initial assessment of the worker's overall disability, without specific reference to standardized impairment evaluation protocols. Option B. A rating based primarily on the injured worker's reported limitations and inability to perform their pre-injury job duties, as communicated by the worker and their treating physician. Option C. A comprehensive assessment utilizing the most current edition of the AMA guides to the evaluation of permanent impairment, applied strictly according to the specific criteria for the diagnosed condition and in conjunction with the state's workers' compensation statutes. Option D. A rating derived from a previous impairment evaluation conducted for a different injury, or under the guidelines of another state's workers' compensation system. The correct answer is C. A comprehensive assessment utilizing the most current edition of the AMA guides to the evaluation of permanent impairment, applied strictly according to the specific criteria for the diagnosed condition and in conjunction with the state's workers' compensation statutes. Explanation: the scenario of calculating impairment ratings in workers' compensation presents a significant professional challenge due to the inherent subjectivity involved and the critical impact on an injured worker's benefits. Navigating this requires a meticulous adherence to established guidelines, ensuring fairness and accuracy. The challenge lies in balancing the medical findings with the specific requirements of the governing regulation, preventing both under- and overestimation of disability. The correct approach involves a systematic application of the AMA guides to the evaluation of permanent impairment, as adopted by the relevant state's workers' compensation statutes. This method is correct because it provides a standardized, evidence-based framework for assessing functional loss. Adherence to these guides ensures consistency, objectivity, and compliance with the legal framework governing workers' compensation claims. It is ethically imperative to use the officially sanctioned methodology to ensure that injured workers receive benefits commensurate with their actual, documented impairment, and that employers and insurers are assessed fairly based on objective criteria. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the treating physician's subjective opinion without reference to the AMA guides fails to meet the regulatory requirements. This is a failure because it bypasses the mandated standardized assessment process, potentially leading to arbitrary or inconsistent ratings. Another incorrect approach, using a previous impairment rating from a different injury or a different jurisdiction, is also professionally unacceptable. This violates the principle of assessing the current, specific injury within the applicable legal framework. It introduces irrelevant data and disregards the unique circumstances and regulatory requirements of the current claim. A third incorrect approach, prioritizing the worker's perceived inability to work over objective medical impairment, is ethically and regulatorily flawed. While functional capacity is a consideration in overall disability, the impairment rating itself must be based on the medical assessment of functional loss as defined by the guides, not solely on subjective reports of work limitations. Professionals should approach impairment rating calculations by first thoroughly understanding the specific state's workers' compensation laws and their adoption of the AMA guides. They must then meticulously gather all relevant medical documentation and apply the appropriate chapters and criteria of the AMA guides to the specific injury. Any deviations or unique circumstances must be clearly documented and justified within the regulatory framework. This systematic and compliant process ensures that the impairment rating is accurate, defensible, and ethically sound. Question 15. Analysis of a situation where an employee, injured on the job, expresses frustration with the workers' compensation benefits and inquires about suing their employer for pain and suffering beyond what the system provides. What is the most appropriate course of action for a certified WorkComp advisor, CWCA, to take, adhering strictly to the regulatory framework governing workers' compensation in the United States? Option A. Advise the employee that their exclusive remedy for a workplace injury is typically through the workers' compensation system, which generally bars civil lawsuits against the employer, and suggest consulting with an attorney if they believe an exception to this rule might apply. Option B. Provide a detailed legal analysis of potential tort claims and exceptions to the exclusive remedy doctrine, guiding the employee on how to build a case for a civil lawsuit. Option C. Inform the employee that workers' compensation is the only recourse and that any discussion of lawsuits is outside the scope of their role and the law. Option D. Immediately assist the employee in drafting a civil complaint against their employer, as they are clearly seeking compensation for pain and suffering. The correct answer is A. Advise the employee that their exclusive remedy for a workplace injury is typically through the workers' compensation system, which generally bars civil lawsuits against the employer, and suggest consulting with an attorney if they believe an exception to this rule might apply. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a certified WorkComp advisor, CWCA, to navigate the delicate balance between an employee's potential desire for recourse and the established legal framework designed to limit such actions when workers' compensation is the exclusive remedy. Misinterpreting or misapplying these limitations can lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions for the advisor and their client, as well as potential harm to the employee. The CWCA must possess a deep understanding of the exclusive remedy doctrine and its exceptions within the specific jurisdiction governing the workers' compensation claim. The correct approach involves advising the employee that, generally, their exclusive remedy for a workplace injury is through the workers' compensation system, and this system is designed to preclude most civil lawsuits against the employer. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the fundamental principles of workers' compensation law, which establish a trade-off. Employees receive no-fault benefits, and in return, they generally forfeit the right to sue their employer for negligence or other torts related to the injury. A CWCA ethical duty includes providing accurate information about the legal landscape of workers' compensation. An incorrect approach would be to immediately encourage or assist the employee in pursuing a civil lawsuit without a thorough analysis of whether an exception to the exclusive remedy rule applies. This is a regulatory and ethical failure because it disregards the statutory limitations on employee lawsuits and could lead the employee down a path of costly and ultimately unsuccessful litigation, potentially violating their rights and misrepresenting the legal protections afforded by the workers' compensation system. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the employee's concerns outright and refuse to discuss any potential avenues for recourse, even if the circumstances might warrant an exception to the exclusive remedy doctrine. This is a failure because it neglects the advisor's responsibility to provide comprehensive guidance and explore all relevant legal possibilities within the scope of their expertise, potentially leaving the employee without crucial information about their rights. A third incorrect approach would be to provide legal advice regarding the viability of a civil lawsuit. As a CWCA, the advisor's role is to provide guidance within the workers' compensation framework, not to act as legal counsel. Offering legal opinions on tort claims or the exceptions to the exclusive remedy doctrine without being a licensed attorney constitutes practicing law without a license, a serious regulatory and ethical violation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Actively listening to the employee's concerns and understanding the nature of their injury and their desired outcome. 2. Recalling and applying the core principles of the exclusive remedy doctrine as defined by the relevant workers' compensation statutes. 3. Identifying potential exceptions to the exclusive remedy rule that might be applicable to the employee's specific situation, e.g., intentional torts, employer fraud, dual capacity doctrine, if recognized in the jurisdiction. 4. If the circumstances suggest a potential exception, advising the employee to seek independent legal counsel from a qualified attorney specializing in employment law or civil litigation, rather than attempting to provide legal advice themselves. 5. Clearly communicating the limitations of their role as a CWCA and the boundaries of the workers' compensation system. Question 16. The investigation demonstrates that a manufacturing company, Metalworks, routinely leases specialized welders from a staffing agency, WeldPro Staffing. WeldPro Staffing handles payroll, benefits, and initial hiring for these welders. However, Metalworks provides the specific welding assignments, dictates the work schedule, supplies all welding equipment and materials, and directly supervises the quality and execution of the welding tasks on its premises. A welder, while performing work exclusively for Metalworks, suffers a severe injury. Metalworks claims the welder is solely an employee of WeldPro Staffing and therefore not their responsibility. Which approach best addresses the worker's compensation liability in this scenario? Option A. Determine liability based on the entity that handles payroll and benefits, as this is the primary indicator of employment. Option B. Conduct a detailed factual inquiry into the right of control exercised by Metalworks over the welder's day-to-day activities, applying established legal tests for borrowed servants and leased employees. Option C. Rely solely on the contractual agreement between Metalworks and WeldPro Staffing, which designates WeldPro as the employer of record. Option D. Assume the staffing agency is always liable for leased employees, as they are the general employer and responsible for providing coverage. The correct answer is A. Determine liability based on the entity that handles payroll and benefits, as this is the primary indicator of employment. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in workers' compensation, where the lines of employment can become blurred, impacting who is responsible for providing coverage and benefits. The professional challenge lies in accurately determining the employer-employee relationship under the specific legal framework governing workers' compensation in the relevant jurisdiction, which for the CWCA exam is assumed to be U.S. state-based workers' compensation law. Misclassification can lead to significant financial penalties, denial of benefits to injured workers, and legal disputes. Careful judgment is required to apply the established legal tests for borrowed servants and leased employees. The correct approach involves a thorough analysis of the facts against the established legal tests for determining employment status, specifically focusing on the right of control. This typically involves examining factors such as who directs the details of the work, who has the power to hire and fire, who provides the tools and equipment, and who pays the wages. Under U.S. workers' compensation law, the entity that exercises the right of control over the employee's work is generally considered the employer for purposes of liability. This approach ensures compliance with statutory requirements and protects the rights of injured workers by identifying the responsible party for coverage. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the contractual agreement between the general employer and the borrowing/leasing entity. Contracts are a factor. They are not determinative if the reality of the working relationship, particularly the exercise of control, differs. Another incorrect approach would be to assume the general employer is always responsible, regardless of the degree of control exercised by the special employer. This ignores the legal tests designed to address situations where an employee is temporarily placed under the direction of another entity. Failing to conduct a fact-specific inquiry into the right of control and relying on superficial indicators or assumptions leads to regulatory and ethical failures, potentially leaving injured workers without benefits and exposing businesses to liability. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes a comprehensive factual investigation. This involves gathering all relevant documentation, interviewing key personnel from all involved entities, and meticulously applying the legal tests for employment status as defined by the applicable state workers' compensation statutes and case law. The focus must be on the substance of the relationship, particularly the exercise of control, rather than mere labels or contractual provisions. Question 17. During the evaluation of a client's understanding of the fundamental principles of workers' compensation, which of the following best reflects the primary historical impetus behind the development of these laws in the United States? Option A. The primary historical impetus was to create a system that allowed employees to sue employers for any workplace injury, regardless of fault, to maximize employee recovery and hold employers strictly liable for all incidents. Option B. The primary historical impetus was a purely humanitarian effort to ensure that all injured workers receive compensation solely out of employer benevolence and a desire to avoid negative public perception. Option C. The primary historical impetus was to shift all liability for workplace injuries from employees to insurance companies, with no reciprocal concessions from employees regarding their right to sue. Option D. The primary historical impetus was the establishment of a no-fault system that provided injured workers with benefits regardless of fault, in exchange for limiting their ability to sue employers for negligence, thereby creating a more predictable framework for both parties. The correct answer is D. The primary historical impetus was the establishment of a no-fault system that provided injured workers with benefits regardless of fault, in exchange for limiting their ability to sue employers for negligence, thereby creating a more predictable framework for both parties. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because understanding the historical context and foundational principles of workers' compensation laws is crucial for accurately advising clients and ensuring compliance. A superficial understanding can lead to misinterpretations of current statutes and regulations, potentially resulting in inadequate coverage, improper claims handling, or legal liabilities. The Certified WorkComp Advisor (CWCA) designation implies a deep understanding of the entire workers' compensation ecosystem, including its origins. The correct approach involves recognizing that modern workers' compensation systems in the United States largely evolved as a compromise between employers and employees, moving away from the common law tort system. This compromise aimed to provide a more efficient and predictable system for compensating injured workers while limiting employer liability for certain types of damages. Specifically, it established a no-fault system where employees receive benefits regardless of fault, in exchange for relinquishing their right to sue employers for negligence in most cases. This foundational understanding is essential for interpreting the intent and scope of current workers' compensation statutes. An incorrect approach would be to assume that workers' compensation laws were solely a response to humanitarian concerns, without acknowledging the reciprocal nature of the compromise. While humanitarian aspects were a factor, the legal and economic underpinnings of the system were driven by the desire to reduce litigation and provide a stable framework for both parties. Another incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the employer's perspective, viewing these laws as an undue burden without appreciating the benefits of a predictable system and the avoidance of potentially ruinous tort judgments. Conversely, focusing exclusively on the employee's entitlement without acknowledging the employer's concessions in the no-fault system is also an incomplete understanding. Professionals should approach such evaluations by first identifying the core historical drivers of the legislation. This involves understanding the problems the laws were designed to solve, e.g., the inefficiencies and inequities of the common law system for workplace injuries, and the compromises made to achieve a workable solution. This historical lens provides critical context for interpreting specific provisions and advising clients on their rights and obligations within the current regulatory framework. Question 18. System analysis indicates that following a workplace accident, a certified WorkComp advisor, CWCA, is tasked with reviewing the incident to advise on the claim. The CWCA has gathered initial statements from several employees, including the injured worker, a co-worker who witnessed the event, and the direct supervisor. The CWCA notes some minor differences in the sequence of events described by the injured worker and the co-worker, and the supervisor's statement focuses primarily on the injured worker's alleged negligence. What is the most appropriate approach for the CWCA to take in proceeding with the accident investigation and analysis of witness statements? Option A. Prioritize the supervisor's statement due to their position of authority and focus on the alleged negligence, and proceed with advising on the claim based on this perspective. Option B. Conduct follow-up interviews with the injured worker and the co-worker to clarify the differing accounts of the event sequence, and also seek statements from other potential witnesses who may have observed the incident or its immediate aftermath, before forming a conclusion. Option C. Accept the supervisor's statement as the definitive account of the incident, as it comes from management, and disregard the differing details provided by the other witnesses as potentially unreliable. Option D. Immediately reconcile the minor discrepancies between the injured workers and co-workers' statements by making a reasonable assumption about the most likely sequence of events, and then finalize the investigation. The correct answer is A. Prioritize the supervisor's statement due to their position of authority and focus on the alleged negligence, and proceed with advising on the claim based on this perspective. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the Certified WorkComp Advisor, CWCA, must balance the need for timely and thorough accident investigation with the ethical and legal obligations to ensure the accuracy and integrity of witness statements. The CWCA role is to advise on work comp claims, and the quality of information gathered directly impacts claim adjudication, benefit eligibility, and potential fraud detection. Misinterpreting or mishandling witness statements can lead to incorrect claim outcomes, financial penalties, and damage to the reputation of the advisor and the employer. The correct approach involves meticulously documenting all witness statements, cross-referencing them for consistency, and identifying any discrepancies that require further investigation. This approach is correct because it aligns with the fundamental principles of due diligence and accurate fact-finding, which are paramount in work comp claims. Regulatory frameworks, while not explicitly detailed here for a specific U.S. state, universally emphasize the importance of objective evidence and thorough investigation. Ethically, a CWCA has a duty to act in good faith and provide advice based on reliable information. This method ensures that all available information is considered, inconsistencies are addressed, and the final assessment is grounded in a comprehensive understanding of the incident. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on obtaining statements quickly, without verifying their consistency or seeking corroboration, fails to meet the standard of a thorough investigation. This can lead to the acceptance of inaccurate information, potentially resulting in fraudulent claims or denial of legitimate claims. Such an approach violates the ethical duty to provide competent advice and may contravene regulatory requirements for claim investigation that mandate a reasonable and diligent inquiry. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes only statements from supervisors or management, disregarding statements from other employees or witnesses, introduces bias into the investigation. The selective gathering of information can obscure critical details or perspectives, leading to an incomplete and potentially unfair assessment of the incident. This practice is ethically questionable, as it fails to seek all relevant facts and can be seen as an attempt to control the narrative, which is contrary to the principles of impartial investigation. A further incorrect approach that relies heavily on assumptions or preconceived notions about the incident, rather than strictly adhering to the factual content of witness statements, is also professionally unacceptable. This introduces subjective bias and undermines the objective nature of the investigation. It deviates from the core responsibility of a CWCA to analyze evidence, not to impose personal interpretations without factual support, potentially leading to misrepresentation of facts and flawed advice. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a systematic process. First, clearly define the objective of the investigation to gather accurate facts about the accident. Second, identify all potential sources of information, including all witnesses. Third, develop a structured approach to interviewing and documenting statements, ensuring questions are open-ended and non-leading. Fourth, critically analyze the collected statements, looking for corroboration and discrepancies. Fifth, follow up on any inconsistencies or gaps in information through further interviews or evidence gathering. Finally, synthesize all findings into a comprehensive and objective assessment. Question 19. Compliance review shows that a claims handler is consistently closing claims within 30 days of the injury date, citing improved case closure rates as a measure of productivity. The injured worker in one recent case, a warehouse associate who sustained a back injury, was cleared for light duty by their physician, but has not yet been offered any modified tasks by the employer, and the claim is now being closed with ongoing medical recommendations for physical therapy. What is the most appropriate next step for the certified WorkComp advisor to take regarding this claims handler's approach? Option A. Recommend that the claims handler document the physician's initial clearance for light duty and proceed with closing the claim, as the worker was medically cleared for some activity. Option B. Suggest the claims handler focus on reducing the estimated reserves for future claims, as this will also demonstrate improved financial productivity. Option C. Advise the claims handler to immediately reopen the closed claim and work with the employer to identify suitable modified duty assignments, ensuring the injured worker receives ongoing recommended medical treatment. Option D. Inform the claims handler that their focus on rapid claim closure is negatively impacting long-term program productivity and suggest they prioritize medical necessity over closure speed. The correct answer is C. Advise the claims handler to immediately reopen the closed claim and work with the employer to identify suitable modified duty assignments, ensuring the injured worker receives ongoing recommended medical treatment. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge for certified WorkComp advisors, CWCA, where the pressure to demonstrate immediate productivity gains conflicts with the long-term, sustainable management of a workers' compensation program. The professional challenge lies in balancing the employer's desire for cost reduction with the ethical and regulatory obligations to ensure injured workers receive appropriate care and benefits, which ultimately contributes to program stability and productivity. Rushing the return-to-work process or prematurely closing claims without proper medical clearance can lead to claim reopenings, increased litigation, and a breakdown of trust between the employer, employees, and the claims management team, all of which negatively impact long-term productivity. The correct approach involves a comprehensive, medically guided return-to-work strategy. This entails working closely with the treating physician to understand the worker's limitations and capabilities, identifying suitable modified duty assignments that align with those restrictions, and facilitating a gradual reintegration into the workforce. This method is ethically sound and compliant with workers' compensation principles by prioritizing the worker's recovery and well-being, while also addressing the employer's need for operational continuity. Regulatory frameworks for workers' compensation emphasize timely and appropriate medical care and the promotion of return to work, which this approach directly supports. An incorrect approach of pressuring the injured worker to return to full duty before medical clearance is ethically problematic and potentially violates regulations. It disregards the physician's medical opinion and places the worker at risk of re-injury or exacerbation of their condition, leading to further lost time and increased costs. This approach prioritizes perceived immediate productivity over the worker's health and the integrity of the claims process. Another incorrect approach of immediately closing claims once initial medical treatment is completed, without confirming the worker's ability to return to their regular duties or exploring modified duty options, is also a failure. This overlooks the possibility of ongoing disability or the need for rehabilitation services, which are crucial components of a successful workers' compensation program. Such premature closure can lead to appeals, reopenings, and a perception of unfairness, undermining the program's effectiveness and the advisor's credibility. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on reducing claim reserves without a corresponding reduction in actual claim costs or a clear plan for improved outcomes is a misdirection. While reserve management is important, it should be a reflection of the anticipated claim trajectory, not a driver of premature closure or a means to artificially inflate productivity metrics. True productivity in workers' compensation is achieved through effective claim management that leads to faster, safer returns to work and reduced overall claim expenditures over time. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that begins with a thorough understanding of the claim's medical status and the worker's functional capacity in consultation with medical professionals. This should be followed by an assessment of available modified duty options within the employer's operations. The process must also consider the relevant state's workers' compensation statutes and administrative rules regarding return to work, medical benefits, and claim closure. Ethical considerations, such as the duty of care to the injured worker and the obligation to provide accurate advice to the employer, must guide every step. Question 20. Comparative studies suggest that employers who delay reporting work-related injuries to their insurers face increased claim costs and potential penalties. Considering the employer's responsibility to report, which of the following actions best aligns with regulatory requirements and professional best practices for a certified work comp advisor? Option A. Immediately report the claim to the insurer upon learning of a work-related injury requiring medical attention beyond first aid. Option B. Report the claim only if the injury appears severe enough to result in a permanent disability. Option C. Wait for the injured employee to file a formal claim with the employer before reporting it to the insurer. Option D. Delay reporting the claim until the employee misses a significant amount of time from work. The correct answer is A. Immediately report the claim to the insurer upon learning of a work-related injury requiring medical attention beyond first aid. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because the employer's failure to promptly report a work-related injury to the insurer can have significant financial and legal repercussions. The delay can impact the insurer's ability to investigate the claim effectively, potentially leading to disputes over compensability, increased claim costs due to delayed medical treatment, and penalties for the employer. The advisor must navigate the employer's potential reasons for delay, e.g., underestimation of severity, desire to avoid premium increases, while upholding their duty to ensure compliance with regulatory requirements. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves immediately reporting the claim to the insurer as soon as the employer becomes aware of a work-related injury that requires medical attention beyond first aid. This aligns with the fundamental responsibility of an employer under workers' compensation laws to notify the designated insurance carrier promptly. The specific timeframe for reporting is often dictated by state statutes and insurance policy provisions, but the overarching principle is to facilitate timely claim handling and investigation. Prompt reporting ensures the insurer can initiate its claims process, conduct necessary investigations, authorize medical treatment, and manage the claim efficiently, thereby protecting both the employee and the employer from undue delays and potential disputes. This proactive stance is ethically sound and legally mandated. Incorrect approach is analysis. Delaying the report until the employee misses significant time from work is an incorrect approach. This failure to report promptly violates the employer's statutory duty to notify the insurer of all work-related injuries. It prejudices the insurer's ability to investigate the circumstances of the injury and the employee's medical condition, potentially leading to a denial of benefits or increased litigation. Ethically, it prioritizes the employer's perceived short-term interests over the employee's right to timely benefits and the insurer's need for accurate information. Reporting the claim only if the injury appears to be severe enough to result in a permanent disability is also an incorrect approach. Workers' compensation laws typically require reporting of all injuries that necessitate medical treatment beyond basic first aid, regardless of the perceived long-term outcome. This approach risks underreporting claims, which can lead to penalties for the employer and a failure to provide necessary benefits to injured workers. It demonstrates a misunderstanding of the scope of reporting obligations. Waiting for the injured employee to file a formal claim with the employer before reporting it to the insurer is an incorrect approach. The employer's responsibility to report is triggered by their knowledge of a work-related injury, not by the employee initiating a formal internal claim process. This delay can be significant and is a direct violation of the employer's reporting duty, potentially causing harm to the employee and exposing the employer to penalties. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a proactive and compliant approach. When an employer becomes aware of a work-related injury that requires medical attention, the immediate professional action is to ensure the claim is reported to the insurer within the legally mandated timeframe. This involves understanding the specific reporting requirements of the relevant jurisdiction and the employer's insurance policy. If there is any doubt about the severity or reporting threshold, it is always best practice to err on the side of caution and report the incident. Professionals should educate employers on these obligations and the consequences of noncompliance, fostering a culture of safety and timely claim management.